Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of the Board Hitters and Bourbon podcast, proudly presented by the Daily Gallop. My name's Joseph Wulffe. You can find me specifically on social media at Wheaton Bourbon Guy. That's at WHTNBOURBONGUY, and that's for specifically Twitter and Instagram. Just before we kick things off, obviously this is going to get watched here on YouTube. Normally what I do is I do this podcast on Twitter live stream. This is something I'm going to be trying a little bit different here, try and get a bigger audience for this podcast. A little bit about myself. I am one of the feature writers for the Daily Gallop. This podcast originally started off as a feature called The Race of the Week. It was found on Anonymous Racing. It eventually moved over to the Board Hitters and Bourbon. It moved over to the Daily Gallop and morphed into the Board Hitters and Bourbon podcast. I also do a feature there called the Kentucky Derby Futures Index. With that, basically what I do is I analyze horses for this year's Kentucky Derby as if they're commodities on the stock market. And it's a fun article for anyone who wants to take a look at that. Go over to the Daily Gallop. It's a website on there. You can find all of the pieces that I've written thus far. And then also feel free to check out my social media pages, and you can find all the other content that I share, as well as I do horse racing photography, and a lot of that gets posted both on Instagram and on Twitter. About this podcast, so what this podcast is I go and sometimes it's via poll, other times it's via just my decision as to picking a stakes race, generally a stakes race, not necessarily, picking a race across the country that I would like to cover and present to you. It may not necessarily be the best race in the country, but it is a race that I am going to feature. I'll preview the field, I'll offer up my opinions on various runners in that race, and then I will also go ahead and provide selections too at the end of it. Once that's over, I will go ahead and usually do a bourbon review. It varies. What I'll be doing now, since this is moving over to YouTube, be starting out with some of the basics. Tonight's bourbon review is actually going to be this one here, for those of you who can see it. This is Buffalo Trace. This is just their normal brand offering. This is their Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. You can find it in most grocery stores. It's about $20 to $25. It's a really nice offering here for those of you who are just getting into bourbon. It's a really good way to start off, and it's a solid way. Eventually what I'll be doing is I'll be working up to more and more advanced things as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick things off. We'll be taking a look then at this field for the Grade 3 Holy Bull Stakes held this Saturday at Gulfstream Park down in Hallandale Beach. It's one of a fantastic number of stakes races held down there, and it's going to go off as race number 11. The approximate post time for the race is 5:04 p.m. Eastern Time. And one thing to note, though, is there is a substantial amount of rain in the forecast. Potentially severe thunderstorms are being forecast tonight into Saturday and going throughout the day Saturday. So that is one thing to keep in mind when playing any races down there at Gulfstream Park. So it is likely that track will turn up sloppy. This race is one of three 2020 Road to the Kentucky Derby prep races, awarding a series of Kentucky Derby points to the winners or to the top four finishers at the rate of 10, 4, 2, and 1 for first through fourth place. And the other two races are going to be the Grade 3 Withers Stakes, run at 9 furlongs or a mile and an eighth up at Aqueduct. Another individual at the Daily Gallop will be covering that entire card. And then the third race is the Grade 3 Robert B. Lewis Stakes. It's also run at a mile and 16th, the same distance as this Holy Bull. It is at Santa Anita, and I believe Spencer John Luganville, one of the co-founders for the Daily Gallop, will be covering that race as well. So let's take a look at this field. It's a relatively small field. Just 7 runners are entered into it, and it's a compact field, but there are some very talented horses in here. There are also some horses too that have some major question marks about it. First things first, usually what I like to do with these ones when handicapping is go ahead and take a look at the pace projector or a potential pace scenario for there. When doing my handicapping, the two big products that I rely on are the past performances from Brisnet, and then I also take a look at the past performances as well as the pace projector from Timeform US. Another useful tool if you look into something like that is OpticsPlot. OpticsPlot is right now offering free plots for all of the potential Kentucky Derby preps this year. Just simply go sign up for an account on them. This is not a plug whatsoever. I just simply like their product there. You can go sign up for an account. Once you get the account, they'll send you an email and with a link, and you can just go simply click on their plots for each of the Derby prep races. So in this race, the Timeform pace projector is actually predicting a fast pace for this field. It's a rather condensed pace projector as well. They suggest that there shouldn't be more than 10 lengths separating the front runners from those in the rear of the field, at least by the half-mile mark in this race. The horse with the most speed in here is the number 6, that is Relentless Dancer. Last time out, he has not been seen since winning a $100,000 Louisiana-bred stakes down at Delta Downs on October 19th. It was a 7-furlong affair, which down at Delta Downs is actually a 2-turn event, and he ended up winning that race fairly handily by 10 lengths. Timeform projects him to be the fastest in the field, followed by the number 7, Mayberry Deputy, and then afterwards there is sort of a line of horses just behind them, as well as those who are going to be trailing the field, namely the morning line 3-5 favorite in 'Tis the Law. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead. I'll just go through in post position order, starting with the number 1. This is Toledo, trained by Chad Brown, ridden by Irad Ortiz this Saturday. He's owned by Juddmonte Farms. Last time out on December 20th, he took on One Common Foe in this field in Ete Indienne. This was a 1-mile race, so 1-turn mile over the main track at Gulfstream Park in a $75,000 optional claiming race for 9 winners of 1. He started off towards the rear of the field early on. He encountered a good deal of traffic, went 4 wide into the final turn, and just simply could not get past the likes of the massive long shot Etienne Indienne, who beat him by 2.5 lengths. He did earn a 100 Timeform speed rating, which is a fairly solid speed rating for that race. And just looking at that, it's a good way to improve. My concern with him, obviously, is he needs to show more, especially when stepping up in class. This is going to be a bit tougher of a test for him. This is going to be his first attempt at a 2-turn route. However, his pedigree is fairly solid for it. He's by Into Mischief, who over the past, say, throughout 2019 and thus far into 2020, has been an absolutely fantastic sire. Underneath, he is by an incredibly good sire in Bernardini, so stretching out to that 1.16 distance should not be too hard for him. Chad Brown does very well with runners who are attempting route races for the second time. Over the past 3 years, with 34 starts, he's been firing at a 41% win rate. That's absolutely impeccable. Irad Ortiz obviously stays aboard for the 4th time. This horse does have the potential to improve. Irad has been very, very good thus far down at Gulfstream Park. And moreover, his pedigree is solid. This horse is yet to be tested over a sloppy track. However, his pedigree is very solid for handling an off track like that. His most recent works are very good. They do suggest that he is in fine form going to this. Chad Brown, going from allowance to stakes company, according to Timeform, ranks a 98 out of a 100, which is a very, very good rating. We'll keep on moving along to the number 2 at 12-1 on the morning line. This is Uncork the Bottle. He's trained by Joseph Saffy Jr. Saffy Joseph Jr. He'll be ridden by Edgard Zayas. He's owned by Bassett Stables. Last time out on January 15th, he won a $40,000 optional claiming race, going a mile on the turf. Prior to that, he had done fairly well, but against really, really weak company, taking on optional claiming $60,000, and then also he began his career racing a maiden claiming $16,000 sprinting. His pedigree is okay for stretching out to a two-turn dirt route, but his speed figures are rather weak. At least his two speed figures on the dirt are quite slow. This is a rather quick turnaround for him as well. It's just a 17-day turnaround from that effort on the turf, and I'm not really impressed by him. For those of you who follow horse racing, you may very well be familiar with another $16,000 maiden claimer who burst into the scene in the Florida Derby and then, quote unquote, won the Kentucky Derby. This horse is not maximum security, and Saffie Joseph Jr., despite having gotten off to an incredibly hot start thus far at Gulfstream Park, is hopefully not Jason Service in terms of some of the connotations that are associated with him. I'm not really in love with this horse. I think he projects to be in that first flight of runners stalking the initial pace. I just don't think that his speed figures really make him a major contender here, and I'm not all that impressed with him. 12-1 is a good price, so if you do like him, you could play him underneath in this race, but I will not be doing so. We'll keep on moving along to the number 3. This is Tiz the Law. Tiz the Law is the 3-5 morning favorite. He's trained by Barclay Tagg. He'll be ridden by Manny Franco for Saratoga Stable. He has not been seen since finishing third in the Grade 2 Kentucky Jockey Club that was run at 1 mile and a 16th over a very sloppy track at Churchill Downs back at the end of November. In that race, he broke fairly well. He was pretty much mid-pack throughout the early race. Turning for home, he got stuck in a pocket. He got caught up in traffic. He really didn't have clear running room until the 8th pole. When he finally got free, he just simply could not get past Silver Prospector, and actually a massive long shot in Finnick the Fierce drove past him. His 101 time form speed rating was the slowest thus far of his 3-race career. His speed figures have actually decreased in each and every start, both on time form and on Brisnet. So that is a little bit of a concern there. The question for me that lingers is, his pedigree suggests he should love racing over a sloppy track, and yet I'm not entirely sure as to if it was the track or if it was the traffic that he got caught up in that caused him to have those issues in that Kentucky Jockey Club. He's likely going to encounter a similar scenario tomorrow in that race. Manny Franco is going to have to do his utmost best to keep him out of traffic early on, especially since he projects to be towards the rear of the field according to the time form pace projector. He doesn't have a lot of early speed. He's going to get past early on, so we'll see how that works out. However, he has been working very, very well over the track at Gulfstream Park and also over the track at Palm Meadows for Tagg. This trainer does fairly well returning runners from 46 to 90 days away, so we'll see how that goes. And his pedigree suggests that handling this distance shouldn't be too much of an issue. Just my biggest concern with him is the price. The price, 3-5 on the morning line, is a very short price, and I think that sort of opens him up to being a vulnerable favorite in this race. If we keep moving along, we'll go to the number 4. This is Ete Indien. He is a he is a colt by Summerfront. He's trained by Patrick Bianconi. He'll be ridden by Luca Panici. And if the name Patrick Bianconi sounds familiar, he's the one who had Diamond Oops most recently. A fairly good horse. Last time out, he did beat Toledo in his dirt debut. His prior efforts had been on the turf. This is a horse whose pedigree absolutely screams turf. Summerfront is a very, very classy son of Warfront, who did a lot of his best running over in France. Mizzenmast is another very good turf runner as well. His dam was an okay horse in East India. He does, Ete Indienne does have one of the highest last out speed figures with a 106 time form speed rating. He projects to be up close to the pace. I'm not necessarily sure he's going to be right on the front end of this race, but he could be if he adopts a similar running style to what he displayed last time out. He is obviously stepping up in class. There are a number of concerns for me with this horse. I do like him. I would like him a lot more if this race was run on a fast dry track, but unfortunately his pedigree for racing over a wet track or a sloppy or muddy track is not that great. Also, Bianconi struggles with runners returning for second off a layoff, as well as in graded stakes, just a 9% win rate over the past 3 years in both those categories. Luca Panici has not been particularly hot thus far at Gulfstream Park. He does ride very well for Bianconi, posting over the past 60 days a 29% strike rate from 7 starts with a 637 ROI, which is very, very good. This horse has been working out fairly well since his most recent effort, and I think he has a chance in here. If you like him, you can use him, but I would recommend more or less using him underneath. I do think that he is going to encounter some difficulty running on the over a wet track, and ultimately I think this is going to be a horse that ends up going back to the grass later on in his career. If we keep going on, we will take a look at the number 5. This is Clear Destination. He's 20-1 on the morning line, trained by Ashley Brinas. He'll be ridden by Paco Lopez. Of all the horses in this field, he is the one with the most experience. He started 9 times as a 2-year-old. He began his career on the dirt, not running very, very well. He was transferred to a different trainer, to Brinas' barn, went up and raced exclusively at Woodbine, both on the Tapeta up there on the all-weather track and then also on the turf. Last time out, he won a 7-furlong $75,000 optional claiming affair over the all-weather track there. Ended up winning by 4 lengths. He beat Elusive Knight, who is a fairly good horse. My question with him is, I don't necessarily know if he can get the distance. His pedigree is rather weak, both on top and a little bit on the bottom, in terms of being able to stretch out and handle a 2-turn route, as this will be his first time attempting a 2-turn route. And it's important to note in here, of the entire field, there are only 2 horses in this entire field that have actually tried 2 turns in the dirt before. One of them is 'Tis the Law. The other one is Relentless Dancer, although it's at that weird configuration. Everyone else is going to be, even though they may have routed before at, say, a mile, they are going to be trying 2 turns for the first time on the dirt, and that could be a major factor in this race. Looking at Clear Destination, he's fast. At least some of his speed figures are fast on the Tapeta. I'm not necessarily sure as to how well that form that allowed him to be successful on the Tapeta is going to transfer over to a sloppy surface. His sire, Seek Again, has yet to have any progeny race over a muddy track, and meanwhile his dam sire, Congrats, his progeny have met relatively marginal success over sloppy tracks. So he's one who, although he's been working out well, he does go out for a fairly aggressive rider in here who may just decide to gun it. The trainer, I am a little bit concerned, as Ashley struggles with runners attempting a route for the first time, as well as with horses returning from a decent layoff. He's one that I would not recommend using in this field. If we keep on moving along, we will go to the number 6. This is Relentless Dancer. He's trained by Mike Maker. He'll be ridden by Jose Ortiz for the first time since his maiden debut. And last time out, I mentioned that he raced in the $100,000 LA Louisiana Legacy Stakes. It's a Louisiana-bred restricted stakes down at Delta Downs, run over 7 furlongs, but given the configuration of the track at Delta Downs, it is actually a 2-turn race. He ended up winning that by 10 lengths. My concern here with him is I'm not entirely sure as to what sort of quality he beat down in that race. And then also, that was obviously a restricted stakes race. He is now stepping up into open company. Some of these horses may be better than him. He is fast, though. Last time out, he posted a 99 time form speed rating. It's a little bit slow, but I definitely think he can go ahead and improve. His pedigree suggests that he can easily handle the stretch out in distance to 8.5 furlongs, so that should be no issue. His pedigree also suggests that he is going to be able to adapt easily to a wet track, being by midshipman out of a benchmark mare. Both those have thus far produced some fairly good runners over wet tracks. Jose Ortiz is a little bit of a concern here, as he's not been quite as hot as his brother. He still is a very good jockey. He just has struggled when riding for Mike Maker, just 11% win rate over the past 60 days for him. And Mike Maker has not been one of the hottest barns, but he's still been very solid. Another big concern here is this horse has not run since October. It's the longest layoff in the entire field. He has been working very well, though, over the main track at Gulfstream Park, and that is very encouraging to see. So if this horse can handle the step up in class and go ahead and improve on the stretch out, then he's going to be one to watch in here. He's not going to be my top choice, but he would be amongst the top 3. And we'll finally finish things off with the number 7 Mayberry Deputy, 15-1 on the morning line. He's trained by Kenny McPeek, ridden by Julien Leparoux. Last year, Kenny McPeek won this race with Harvey Wallbanger at massive odds. This horse is probably not of the same caliber as Harvey Wallbanger. He is fast. He's done very well in his last 2 starts. He finally broke his maiden on December 28th in a $50,000 maiden effort after he was dropped down in class twice. He ended up winning that race by 2.5 lengths, earned a 95 time form speed rating. It is significantly slower than some of the other horses in this field, so that is a bit of a concern here. Julien Leparoux, though, has been a very good jockey thus far at Gulfstream Park. He's been riding marginally well for Kenny McPeek. His recent works for Mayberry Deputy are fairly good, and if of the entire field, there are only 2 horses in here who actually have prior experience over sloppy track, one of them being Tiz the Law last time out in that Grade 3 Kentucky Jockey Club. The other horse is Mayberry Deputy. 2 starts back at Churchill Downs in a $95,000 maiden race. He went 6 furlongs over a sloppy track. He was soundly beaten by Gold Street. For those of you who pay attention to the Kentucky Derby preps, if you take a look, last Friday at Oaklawn Park, they kicked off their Derby prep season with the Smarty Jones Stakes. It was another sloppy race over a mile there at that track. Gold Street absolutely freaked. He is a slop monster and loved it. He ended up taking that field gate to wire. So, therefore, that loss by Mayberry Deputy to Gold Street doesn't look as bad now, even though it was by a significant margin. You look at this horse, he is going to be moving up in class, so that is obviously a bit of a concern. Kenny McPeek has struggled with runners racing in grade stakes over the past 3 years. Just an 11% win rate from 165 starts, and the experience at Gulfstream Park should help him a little bit. The recent works are just okay, dating back to the beginning of January, so I'm not particularly high on him. He is one that I think you're going to have to watch him going forward. His pedigree on top is a little bit questionable. He's by Majestic Perfection, who was a bona fide sprinter. The furthest distance that Majestic Perfection ever raced was 6 furlongs. Underneath, he's by a Proud Citizen mare. Proud Citizen was an absolutely fantastic contender way back in the early 2000s on the Triple Crown circuit, and therefore there is a lot of stamina coming underneath, but seeing as how that will blend, not quite sure whether or not that works into his favor. So we'll go ahead. I'm not going to use him. You could go ahead and try and include him underneath, but he's especially if he goes off near his 15-1 more in the line, but he's not amongst my top 3. Actually, so my top choice in this race will be the number 1 Toledo. He's 7-2 on the morning line. I don't think you're going to get that at post time, considering he's trained by Chad Brown. I think he's probably going to go off somewhere at 2-1, 5-2 if you're lucky. But he does have a very good pedigree. I think he can handle the stretch out of an extra 16th of a mile. He should be able to get 2 turns easily. And if he continues to improve with his speed figures, he is going to be one to watch out for. Definitely should take to a wet track with ease. He's by a very good sire as well, and Irad has been lights out thus far over the past 2 to 3 weeks at Gulfstream Park. My second choice is going to be Tis the Law. I think he needs to get a better trip for Manny Franco here, and obviously if he does get a better trip, he is going to be very dangerous in here, especially as he has very nice finishing ability. He's one to watch, though, to see whether or not he's going to take to a sloppy track and that will sort of confirm what his issue was in that Kentucky Jockey Club. Was it the traffic that he encountered that cost him getting second or even first in that race, or was it simply he struggled over a very sloppy surface? My third choice in this race will be Relentless Dancer. I am a little leery picking this horse just simply because of the long layoff, but I think he's got very good early speed. He's one that they're going to have to go and try and catch. He should be able to handle the stretch out and distance to a two-turn route, and his pedigree suggests he should easily take to a wet track. Those are going to be my selections here. This is a very, very interesting race here at Gulfstream Park for the 2020 edition of the Mile and 16th Grade 3 Holy Bull Stakes. It is race number 11 there at that track. Approximate post time is 5:04 p.m. Eastern Time. It's one of a series of very good stakes races. It's also one of 3 Kentucky Derby preps being held across the country. And so I want to thank everyone who joined in for that. And we'll go ahead and take a look now at the very fun part of the evening, and that is going to be the bourbon review. So once again, I mentioned that I will be discussing this. Sorry if the camera can focus on this. This is Buffalo Trace. It's Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It is Buffalo Trace's sort of, flagship product on there. And it's a very solid beginner's whiskey on there. It's a nice wheated bourbon on there. It's produced by Sazerac Company. Sazerac is the parent company of Buffalo Trace. They own another distillery down there in Kentucky called 1792. It's 90 proof. There is no age statement on the bottle, which for some people is a big deal breaker, but it's rumored to have been between 8 to 10 years, usually about 9.5. Buffalo Trace themselves say it's about 8 years. That sweet spot for bourbon, at least in my opinion, is in that 8 to 12 year range. It's a very, very good one. It's when the bourbon, I think, has its most flavor. Once you get older than that, it's been sitting in the barrels for quite a long time and starts to get a little more oakiness in there and starts to taste more, get more leathery notes, and I'm not particularly a big fan of that. Any younger than 8 years, I think it's a little bit too immature. It has a really strong ethanol hint nose to it, and then also you might get a little bit of corn in there as well, as it hasn't really finished maturing. So we will go ahead and, for those of you who are not aware, what I like to do is just it's a normal taste test on here. So what I'll do is I'll nose the bourbon first. I'll go ahead and then provide sort of what aromas I'm smelling. Afterwards, I'll go ahead and take a sip, introduce some of the flavors that I'm tasting, then do another sip, and then finally do a palate around the finish there. So the first one on here, just for sake on here, this is a Glencairn glass. You can find them on Amazon. Real inexpensive glasses, but they're really nice for using for doing bourbon tastings or just personal consumption at home. So really pleasant smell on here. This is a bourbon where you get notes of caramel, you get a little bit of honey, some orange and vanilla. We'll go ahead and do one more. And you get a nice balanced nose on here, so you get those flavors, especially the caramel and vanilla, which is commonly found in a lot of bourbons. You'll get that, but then you'll also get an underlayer of oak and mint. We'll go ahead and do the first sip, so cheers to everyone who's watching. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a 90 proof bourbon. It's very, very nice and sweet and mellow. You get brown sugar and vanilla and toffee. It's very delightful. It's almost as if you're walking into a bakery shop and reaching, say, for like a cinnamon bun or something like that, or some sort of nice, sweet, sticky bun. Their cinnamon bun would be something with a little more rye. So we'll do one more taste. You definitely get a lot of that brown sugar and vanilla and toffee in there. You are getting a little bit of oak as it's starting to mature, so you get a little bit more of those oak notes popping out, and then you're also getting a little bit of rye spice in there. It's not overwhelming and it's not unpleasant. It's just very, very nice. It may be too sweet for some individuals, but for me, it's a really nice bourbon. The finish on here, it's a moderate length finish. You do get it where it's not one that's particularly viscous, where it's really, really coating the tongue and making it difficult to speak. It's one where it's more just nice. You get a little bit of oak up front, and then it opens up, fills your nostrils. Just pleasant. No major burn on there. Just very, very sweet and relaxed throughout. Overall, this is one of my probably top 10 bourbons. It's a very, very good bourbon to introduce to beginners who are just getting into bourbon drinking, especially at the price point being between $20 to $25. If you can find it at your local grocery store or liquor store there, it's one that if you're not particularly well versed in drinking bourbon, you can go ahead and try it with a little bit of water, maybe on ice. I would not recommend mixing it. It's not a cheap bourbon that just should be used as a mixer. As you gradually progress, you can start eliminating that ice, moving into just a few drops of water, and then finally drinking it neat, as I like to do. And solid bourbon, very, very good, and just one of my favorite overall bourbons. Next week, I would hope everyone else joins me. Come over from Twitter onto here. Go ahead and take a look at this on YouTube. If you do like what you see, go ahead, hit that subscribe button on my channel. Also, go ahead and try and follow me on social media, specifically on Twitter and Instagram. I do provide a lot of updates for this, so if there are any major scratches for the Holy Bull Stakes, that impact my selections, I'll go ahead and release my updated selections on Twitter in the morning. Also, I do horse racing photography so if you are looking for a photographer, at least in the Midwest area, sorry, I'm not going to be able to get out to the East or West Coast, and need some photography work done, I am available, specifically on weekends and then some weekdays. So go ahead and reach out to me that way as well. Send me a DM over on Twitter. And I do want to thank everyone who joined me this evening, and also everyone who is going to be watching this later on, either tonight or tomorrow. Thank you very much. I want to wish you all the best of luck playing the races, and I hope you all have a good night. Thank you. And then this next slide that I'm actually going to put up for you guys will just have my contact information on there. If you want to go ahead and follow me, I'll leave it up for a minute or so. So thank you again.